Hello, my name is Leslie Primo. I'm an art historian. I spent 18 years working at the National Gallery, and now I'm, as I describe on my own website, the itinerant art historian, specialising in early Renaissance art and German medieval art and Renaissance art.
Hi, my name is James Payne, and I started a YouTube channel, and it's called Great Art Explained, and another one called Great Books Explained. And it took off, changed my whole life, and now I am an art historian, apparently, even though I've never studied art history.
Excellent. Right, where are we going to start today, James?
I think we're going to start with what makes art great, or what makes great art even.
Yes, a good point, actually. Yeah, what makes great art? Well, you know, this is a question I ask my students a lot, really, in my course called What Makes a Masterpiece? And what makes great art, I believe, is something that stands the test of time. It's timeless, I suppose. Yeah, that's what makes great art. And you never know what's going to be great art unless you've got some time. History tells us whether it's good or not.
Yeah, longevity is a very important thing with art. Yeah. And as we know, there are many artists in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. We don't know who they are now, who are incredibly famous. Yeah. And I also think resonance as well. I think resonance is a word I use quite a lot, which I love.
Yeah, but what is resonance, James?
I think it's something that has the power to affect you. I think I think great art is something that is not always agreed on for a start.
Right.
And I think everyone has their own individual view of what great art is. And I think it has to have resonance with you.
If everybody has their own individual view of what great art is, how do we come to a consensus? How do we, who is it has decided that the Mona Lisa is great art? There's a consensus on that.
Well, I think there are lots of different ways of deciding whether it's great art, and they're not always correct. But I think there are lots of different methods. I think it's when technique meets great ideas, meets originality. It's a whole combination of things, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Right. There is so much art that other people consider great, which I don't. So I think quite often it's a personal opinion, but I think just because I don't particularly like Jeff Koons, it doesn't make him not a great artist.
No,
it just means that I personally don't like him.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like the Beatles, but they're still great, isn't it? Really.
Well, that's really shocking.
So, who are the gatekeepers, James?
Who are the gatekeepers? I think gatekeepers is another interesting term, and it's another term that I use quite a lot. And I think sometimes art history is governed by a group of people who sometimes have a vested interest in it.
Right.
And I think they're the gatekeepers. I think I've been in the art business for a long time as well. So I've been in the art business for 30 years, on and off, working for big galleries, having my own galleries. And I do find that I walk into a private gallery in London, for example, and it's the same type of people who were there 30 years ago. It's just constantly preaching to the converted. And I think the message of great art is not really getting out.
Yeah. I think, the message of great art is stand in front of something and feel something.
Yeah.
And if you don't feel something, for you it's not great art.
I disagree with that.
You disagree?
Yeah.
Dear.
I do think that there is that knowing the history of art sometimes, or the context of art, can actually change your opinion as to whether you think it's great art. Not always,
right,
but
good point,
sometimes. Yeah. I do think the more and more I learnt about Hieronymus Bosch, for example,
right, yes,
I've completely changed my opinion of him from 20, 30 years ago.
Well, what was it, 20 or 30 years ago? Was it not
I just
very
didn't
good?
think about it.
No.
It just didn't enter my sphere.
Right, yes, yeah.
And I think sometimes that happens, not always.
But don't you think that gets in the way sometimes, knowing stuff about stuff? I say this as an art historian.
Yeah.
I've got a degree in Renaissance studies, a postgraduate degree in Renaissance studies, but it gets in the way. What I tend to sometimes say to my students is that if you didn't know about Van Gogh's life, would you still like his work?
Well, that's a really interesting thing, because in my book, I say knowing what we do know about Van Gogh's life doesn't make Starry Night a better painting, but it can make it more interesting.
Yeah.
I think that there is that there is another element to art that we can appreciate, and I do think standing in front of a painting and just feeling something is really important. But I also feel that context gives you some information about that painting, and it helps. I've changed my opinion many times about artists.
Yeah.
Because of that.
On that note, then, do the artists have to suffer and end up like really poor and die penniless? Is that what makes great art?
No, not really. I mean, I think that many artists have had mental health issues, and I do believe that there's no correlation between mental health and great art. There isn't one. It doesn't exist. But I do think, let's say, for example, Van Gogh. It's a myth that he was a mad artist. He actually had his first episode 2 years before he died. He was 37, before he.
But being a mad artist sells paintings.
Well, that's what Jo van Gogh found out. That's why she released his letters first. So when Jo van Gogh found his letters and had hundreds and hundreds of Van Goghs, she realised that did sell because, and it's the same with Edvard Munch. Edvard Munch followed the example of Van Gogh. He was a big fan of Van Gogh. So that the mad artist sells, but it's a real problematic issue to use those terms, I think.
Yeah. It's working for Yayoi Kusama.
Yeah. Well, she's been in an asylum since 1973, and still works every day. And she says her work keeps her alive, but I don't think it makes her work any better or more interesting, but it adds something to it. I do think it's something, like when you're cooking a great meal or something, when you have a great recipe and then you're adding something to it, you're taking something away. Yeah. It changes what your initial concept of it is. And I think, I could look at the Girl with the Pearl Earring every day, and it's a great painting. I know it's a great painting. I love it because it's a great painting. Yeah. But I'm not sure whether I have any emotional contact with it at all.
Really, that's an interesting point. I mean, I think I do, and I think what makes The Girl with the Pearl Earring a great painting is that it's so different from anything else that Vermeer did. Yeah. And when it seems to be the same, but then you realise, of course, it's a person with no background. Yeah. Not in an interior. You don't know where the person is. And every other painting that Vermeer does, it's either it's always an interior. The person's in an interior, interacting with somebody else, etc., and so on. Or they might be on their own, but they are placed within an interior. Whereas The Girl with the Pearl Earrings placed within this dark void, and it's completely different from anything he's done. Of course, he may have done other things like that, but
we don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah. I mean, yes, it's part of his Trony group of paintings, and those are very interesting paintings.
And I should add at this point as well, you mentioned the word Tronies. For our viewers out there who don't know what that means, Tronies are types of people rather than actual people, so portraits of types of people.
Yeah. There is a possibility there may have been a background to The Girl with the Pearl Earring that over time has been lost. But I think. Well, I do honestly believe The Girl with the Pearl Earring is mainly famous because of the book and the film these days.
Well, I don't know. It was famous before that.
Yeah, it was, of course.
Famous before that, yes. So I was working at the National Gallery when the book came out, before the film came out. Yeah. In fact, I was working in the National Gallery shop, actually. Right, okay. So I remember when the book came in for the first time, and how well it sold.
I think that period of history is very interesting, of why these artists like Vermeer were able to create such a huge, vast amount of work. I mean, I know not much of his survives, but they were selling their work, and they were in people's houses, It was a very interesting period. I think sometimes some things are just personal. The Girl with the Pearl Earring doesn't get to me, whereas the Mona Lisa does.
I mean, I'm a Renaissance art historian, and of course, whenever I go to the Louvre, the one thing I don't do is go and look at the Mona Lisa.
Right.
Yeah. It's not one of the great works by Leonardo.
Okay. I understand why people don't like the Mona Lisa. Just because it's an horrendous experience to go to the Louvre to see it.
It's just terrible, yeah. Plus the fact that it hasn't been cleaned for almost a century, and it's absolutely in a terrible state.
Yeah, they're terrified of cleaning it. The Louvre are terrified of touching it.
Don't you think that Leonardo would have been appalled to see the state it's in now?
Yeah, of course he would have.
Yeah, because that's not what he intended it to look like.
No, I think it's so iconic in the state it's in now that do they want to touch it and lose that iconic status?
Yeah, see, that sounds like my doctor's surgery. I was at my doctor's surgery. They've got a picture there, a reproduction of the hay wain, and it's green. Obviously, the sun's got to it, really. And I showed him an image of what it really does look like, and he said, "Oh, that's awful." So I'm not sure it's a great argument to say that the Mona Lisa should stay the way it is. And
no, I don't think it should stay the way it is. I think it should be cleaned.
I think it should be cleaned.
But I think the Louvre wants to keep it the way it is. But who knows?
Yeah, because they do have the technology to clean it. It's not like they don't. And of course, as you pointed out, the example at the Prado has been cleaned. Yeah. More than likely painted by a pupil of Leonardo at the same time that Leonardo was painting the Mona Lisa, probably standing right next to him. Yeah. So it's a contemporaneous. So it's not like they can't clean it.
But I think it is one of his greatest paintings. Yeah. And I think that he used that painting to practice a lot of his techniques, his sfumato, his his chiaroscuro. He really practiced it on that painting.
Yes. And speaking of chiaroscuro, do you think Caravaggio is the originator of chiaroscuro? Because you mentioned it in the context of Leonardo, who of course died in 1519.
Yeah.
Caravaggio, by the way, was born in 1571.
Yeah, I think we don't know whether he originated it. That's the answer. But I do think perfecting something is, like aerial perspective was perfected by Leonardo. That doesn't mean he invented it, although they said he did originally.
Yes, yeah.
I sometimes think that I don't really care whether Caravaggio invented it or not. I think the important thing is that he really took it and ran with it. I think that's what's important.
So originality isn't that important then?
Well, originality of ideas?
Yeah.
I don't think originality of ideas are important, actually.
Right.
I think, do you?
No, I don't actually.
Right,
no.
okay. I think it's what you do with those ideas. I think there are some great artists. I was reading the other day about Jackson Pollock. Jackson Pollock didn't originate drip paintings. Everyone thinks he did, but Janet Sobel came up with this, the forgotten woman of art history came up with this a long time before.
There's quite a few of those, aren't there?
There are lots of forgotten women in art history, and Janet Sobel is she was shown by Peggy Guggenheim. It's not like she wasn't known at the time.
We should mention her name over and over again, shouldn't we, really?
Sobel.
Yeah, good, yeah.
And but it's what you do with that, though.
Yeah.
It's Rodin based almost all of his work on Michelangelo. Yeah. But that doesn't make him not a great artist, whether you like him or not.
Yeah, and I certainly don't.
Yeah, and I do. But Rodin, to me, is probably one of my favourite artists, not because of his work, but because of his ideas. I think his ideas are just fantastic. He was so different from everybody else.
I have the same feeling about Michelangelo, strangely enough.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean,
definitely.
Great work, but also great ideas.
Yeah.
What about that Venus, Birth of Venus by Botticelli? I mean, it is quite an iconic image now, isn't it?
Yeah.
I used the word advisedly there, iconic. I mean, is that original?
Is the idea original?
Is the idea original?
Well, the idea of Venus stepping off of her shell onto the island is not necessarily original, but I do think that what Botticelli did with it is very original. This is my opinion.
Right.
That he incorporated Christianity into a pagan subject matter, and I find that very, very interesting.
Where's the Christian part in that then?
Well, I think the model that he used for
Venus
is the same model he used for Mary in an earlier painting. I also think the shell, which is a symbol of Christianity, sign of pilgrimage. Yes. And I think he was pandering to his patrons, by the way.
What, the Medici?
This is my opinion. It's not necessarily fact. I think that's what makes it interesting for me. That he was painting at that time when there was purely Christian imagery.
But of course, what we all read about and know about is that he's painting Simonetta Vespucci. Yeah. Is Simonetta Vespucci the image of Mary as well?
Well, if you look at the image of Mary, it's almost identical. In fact, even the same tilt of the head and everything. So, we don't know, but I do think it's interesting that he incorporates some of that symbolism.
Anyway, look. Let's talk about technique and complexity and so on, because this is something that people always do, don't they? When they look at artworks, people say, "God, I couldn't do that, so it must be really good." Yeah. I mean, is that a really good benchmark? Because you can't do it, it must be really good.
or you can do it. It must be really bad. It's actually more common, I think.
My five-year-old son could have done that. Yeah.
I mean, I always think that the great filmmaker John Waters, the American filmmaker,
yes, great,
who's a great collector of modern art as well. He loves modern art. Scythe Wombly's got a great collection, and he said, when someone says to me their child can do that, I say, well, give them a brush because that's worth $2 million.
Yes.
And we know they can't. They can't do it. But is technique important? I don't know. I think sometimes a great work of art is a mixture of technique, it's a mixture of history, it's a mixture of the artist's life sometimes as well. But I think, I think the classic one is the Arnolfini portrait, if we're talking about technique, or the Ghent altarpiece.
Yes, both by, of course, Jan van Eyck.
By Jan van Eyck,
yes.
Which you're an expert on. And
that's very kind of you, James.
But technique-wise, that whole concept of created by God, no hand marks and all that. But if we jump forward to the 20th century, there are so many artists who have great technique who are not really that interesting. So it's not just technique. It never is, I don't think.
Right, so there's something more about the Arnolfini portrait than just mere technique.
Much more.
I think one of the things about the Arnolfini, of course, is the fact that there is only one. People like that, don't they, really?
Yeah.
Because that means it must be great because there's only one.
Yeah.
You don't want to find another Mona Lisa or anything like that, because then it wouldn't be so great, would it? Really? So there's only one, and is that good enough?
Is that the key to success?
Yeah.
There's only one of them.
There's only one. Yeah. There's crowds in front of it every time I'm at the National Gallery here in London.
But there should be as well. Plus, it's very small. So
it's very small as well. Yeah. And the technique is flawless, though, isn't it, really?
The technique is flawless. And I do think that's actually part of its appeal. I think Holbein as well is the same thing. It's part of his appeal. But, I don't think you could say that Van Gogh, for example, has great technique. I really don't think you could. But he still is considered one of the greats.
Well, he's got his own technique, though, hasn't he?
Yeah, when I say
an individual technique.
When I say technique, I mean perfection. That's a lot of people use that as a benchmark with art.
They do,
and I think that's one of the worst benchmarks.
It is,
take.
Yeah, I agree. We've agreed on something. That's pretty good, actually, isn't it? Yeah, I think that is a good point to make. It depends on where you are, doesn't it? Really, because Van Gogh doesn't want that flawless.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
He's quite clear about that in his work. You can see that. Whereas Van Eyck is all about hiding what the actual medium is. You can't see the paint. You can't see any brushstrokes.
Well, I think as well, and again, I'm not an art historian, but I do think, if you look at where technique really radically changed. I mean, I know we can go back further, but just jump to the Impressionists, for example. That's where the technique, where the concept of producing work that doesn't look exactly like it's supposed to look, comes from, and their technique is important. But then you've got a lot of other things coming in. For example, the invention of the camera. Why would Monet paint an apple that looks exactly like an apple? Why not just take a photograph? So that's why technique starts changing. Cézanne, who is one of my favorite artists, his technique was radical. It was just a jump, and if you think about Picasso is a great one to talk about technique, because it changed so often and he stole so much, But I always am astounded that something like Les Demoiselles d'Avignon was created in 1907. Yeah, it's such a modern, radical painting, and that's to do with technique.
Yes,
but I don't think that's the only thing.
No, it's not the only thing, is it, really? It's about, I think it comes back to what I said before, really. It's about how you feel when you're in front of the picture.
Yeah, that's true.
It's how you feel. I think with the Arnolfini portrait, I think we all like to imagine who those people were.
Yeah.
We like to imagine that we might be able to step into that room, and we are being invited into the room.
Yeah.
We're becoming part of the subject. And there's a great sort of mystery around Jan van Eyck himself, isn't there, really? And mystery is one of those other things that I think attracts people to a work of art. We don't know what Jan van Eyck looked like, although the National Gallery have a portrait of a man hanging right next to him by Jan van Eyck, which possibly could be a self-portrait. Yeah. There's no way of proving it. And, of course, the only other image that we have of Van Eyck is in the mirror in the Arnolfini portrait. But it's so tiny, no one can identify it.
Yeah, it's
mystery.
Mystery is important, I think, and I do think, when we think about the Renaissance, for example, we have so much information about those artists, whereas we don't about so many. We don't about Jan van Eyck. We don't about Vermeer. We have almost no information about them, or next to none. By comparison,
that's because of they had a publicist, didn't they? In the Renaissance,
and they loved records. They loved keeping records as well. So
by the name of Giorgio Vasari,
yeah,
who seemed to just decide that all great art was from Florence and in Italy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Artists are good at selling themselves, and sometimes they sell themselves by telling the story, and the story is, mental illness or abuse or something, and or in Munch's case, again.
Yeah. But do you really think that artists are good at selling themselves? Because in my experience, a lot of contemporary artists aren't really good at selling themselves.
I think contemporary artists are incredibly good at selling themselves.
Really?
Sometimes. I think Tracy Emin, Damien Hirst.
They're
the ultimate salesman.
Yes, yeah.
I think Jeff Koons is a great salesman.
Yeah.
Rodin was the greatest salesman of all time.
Yeah, he was pretty good. I don't know if he was as good as Rubens, though.
Well, Rubens was very, very good. That's true. Yeah. Why is Rodin more interesting to me than Rubens? Because I think he was the greatest businessman in art history.
You see, but Rubens had a painting business where he had a massive workshop, and then he had people painting the paintings for him. And then he was also had a restoring workshop as well, restoring paintings as well. And while he was out, he had a knighthood from the King of Spain, a knighthood from the King of England, and got another one when he went back to Antwerp as well. He was working on multiple levels. He's also a diplomat working for the Spanish government at the same time.
And I think the big difference is Rodin didn't care about that stuff. Rodin came from a very working class background.
Right, fair enough.
He was not interested in being pandered to at all. He had no interest in royalty.
Patronage.
He didn't need patronage because he was, he came into it very, very late in his life. And the difference between being a great businessman like Rodin compared with Rubens is Rodin is still selling originals, and he's been dead for nearly 200 years.
Right.
There are 40 versions of the Thinker that have been sold around the world. 28 to 40 is the estimate.
Yeah, but the last Rubens that went on sale went for £50 million.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's pretty decent.
Is that how we judge him? No, I'm absolutely a huge Rubens fan.
Yeah.
Rodin, I've got a real thing for him because I like the fact that he kind of pulled himself up and he had a factory. He had a big factory with lots of people, and he was selling his own work that he never even touched sometimes.
Well, that sounds very Rubens to me.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I need to do more of a comparison.
Mm-hmm. Right, okay, let's have a look at patrons, power, commerce and politics and so on. That's quite a huge area, isn't it, really? And, of course, the patrons that seem to be... I suppose stand out really must be the Medici, mustn't they, really?
Absolutely,
they seem to have had a sort of all-pervasive influence over quite a number of artists.
Yeah.
Do you think that we're still there? Is the patron still in charge?
I think that is slowly changing. I think if you had asked me that question in the 1980s, I might have said yes. I think it's slowly changing. What do you think?
What do I think? Well, I think that the patron is still in charge.
Okay.
Yeah. The patrons have just changed, haven't they, really? I mean, you know who the patrons are because every time you go to an exhibition, the first thing I do is look at the sponsors board in front before you go through the door. I used to teach, by the way, in the city at Bishopsgate Institute. And most of my students who came in were, bankers.
Right.
Because you're at Bishopsgate.
Yeah.
And they said they wanted to get away from banking and do something creative and come to an art history class.
Right.
At which point I informed them that all the patrons were bankers.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe one of the differences might be that some of the great banking families in Siena and the Medici, for example, that they might have been a bit more dictatorial in what they wanted to see in their work. I think nowadays I don't think someone like Jeff Koons listens to what bankers tell him, even though he's selling them to those bankers. Yeah. I think maybe that might be the difference.
Well, let's not forget that Michelangelo didn't listen either. The amount of
that is absolutely true.
rows that he had with Pope Julius II, storming rows.
So, but yeah, I think patronage is an interesting thing, and I think one of the most interesting stories in art is the Jackson Pollock patronage, because that is one of those unknown lesser known stories, maybe.
I don't know anything about it, James.
Oh, okay. So, well, it's kind of now been. It was considered an urban myth for years and years, but the CIA are backed the abstract expressionists, so that's the story, and it's now been. They didn't actually push Jackson Pollock, but they backed organisations and publications, and for the simple reason that it was the Cold War, and in Russia they were producing this highly realistic painting, and everything was prescribed, everything was told to them how to do this and how to paint.
What, so the Americans thought they'd do the same?
No, the Americans did something completely different. They abstract expressionism was already known.
Right.
It was already being shown in New York and some of the larger galleries, but they decided to back it, as in giving the Museum of Modern Art money to send those paintings abroad. So to show that America was free, that just because you don't like something, you have the freedom of choice. You have the freedom to do something.
Right. That's soft power, isn't it?
Yeah, it's soft power. But they were also backing modern dance, and they were also backing publications and poetry readings and things like that. So. And I think it's none of the abstract expressionists knew about this, of course. In fact, it didn't come out until the 1980s.
Right.
But it's interesting how I'm sure a lot of people are backed by patrons who they don't necessarily agree with, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the patrons now, the Saatchi.
Yeah.
Saatchi's a patron, and without Saatchi, arguably, we would have no YBAs, would we? That's the young British artists, of course, Damien Hirst, etc., Tracy Emin. They were all backed by Saatchi.
I don't think that we would have had them, actually, without Saatchi. I think Saatchi, he was an advertising salesman, and Damien Hirst was an art salesman, and they both met and came up with all this huge power. Actually, Tracy Emin wasn't one of the original YBAs.
Oh, that's
but
okay.
Damien Hirst was.
I stand corrected. It's a bit too modern for me.
Right, okay. But yeah, it's I find patrons super interesting. I'd love to hear what you have to say about the portrait of Lady Elizabeth Murray.
Ah, yes.
Because I don't know much about that painting.
Yeah. This portrait of Dido Bell and Lady Elizabeth Murray, it's an interesting painting. It was first thought to have been painted by Johann Zoffany, a Royal Academician. But only recently, in fact, in a television programme, strangely enough, they discovered it wasn't actually by him, it was by David Murray. Now, it's an interesting painting, but I don't think it's a great painting.
Right.
I've written a whole chapter on this painting. It's supposed to be in my latest book, of course, The Foreign Invention of British Art, but in fact it's not in there, it's going to be in the next book. I'm intrigued by the painting. It's not a great painting. What makes it famous now is the fact that Dido Bell is in the painting. Right. She has become famous. Lady Elizabeth Murray now has sort of faded into the background. Of course, Lady Elizabeth Murray related to, of course, Lord Mansfield. And Lord Mansfield, of course, was the person who started the road towards abolition and slavery.
And so why is Dido, for those who don't know, why is Dido interesting because she's in the painting?
Well, she's interesting because it's a black woman in England in this period who seems to be actually a person.
Right.
It's very rare to find black people in paintings that are actually an actual character, a person, without them being caricatured or being a servant, having a collar around their neck, or being a pet to somebody else, which is what they were used for, etc. They are dehumanized.
Right.
In this painting, we have a black woman who seems to be an actual person. She has autonomy, and that's what's so incredible about this picture. But at the same time, it is a picture that is about novelty as well, and exoticization, because Dido did not wear a turban where she came from.
Of course,
The turban has been put on her to give her this extraordinary, exotic look, and she also points at herself in the painting, puts her hand on a cheek like this, and of course that could be interpreted in many ways. Mostly it's interpreted as being coquettish,
right?
But in fact, what it is, in my opinion, is her saying, "Look, I look different. Isn't this amazing?" And pointing it out to their audience. She's also holding a big bowl of fruit, almost like a cornucopia, as it were. And this, again, further adds to the exoticization, this idea of fruit, an exotic creature bearing fruit, as it were. So it's got all those connotations about it, but it's not great art.
Well, I think what you just said is really interesting because it's. I think I'm interested in a hell of a lot of paintings and sculptures and installation work that I don't think is great art, and I think. What you've just said now is so fascinating, and that's such a great story, and that makes me want to see the painting again. You know, I've seen the copy actually. I've never seen the original.
Yeah, it's a difficult painting to see because it's actually owned still by the descendants of the man. So it actually lives at Scone Palace in Perth, in Scotland. But it did come to London recently for the Entangles Past exhibition at the Royal Academy.
Right.
So it was on show there.
I didn't see it.
And when it was originally painted, of course, it was painted for Kenwood House.
Yeah.
And indeed, in the you can see Kenwood, you can see the view from Kenwood House in the background of the painting. So it did live there for a while, and occasionally it does visit Kenwood House. It comes back occasionally.
And Kenwood House is one of the great patrons of the UK as well. I mean, you know, I think those Victorians who made lots of when they made lots of money during the Victorian period and left their money, it's when they were giving money to libraries to educate the poor, whether they wanted it or not. You know, and I think and they left their great collections to London. It's just incredible.
But we also should not forget that a lot of these patrons who gave money to good causes and so on were also invested in slavery.
Of course,
And what they needed to do was wash their money.
And
that's how they did it. Charitable institutions, etc., etc. There's a whole book about this called Green Unpleasant Land by Corinne Fowler.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Need to get that.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, look, let's move on, and we are going to look at do we still need a great canon today? What works need to be recognised? I mean, often students of mine say to me, God, you know, all that Tracy Emin's tent and sharks in fish tanks. God, it's awful, isn't it? Really, and what they expect me, what they expect me to do is to agree with them because I talk about old art all the time, and in fact I don't. I don't agree with them, and the problem is that what I say to students is that where we are now, it's very easy to say, oh, isn't that a great painting, that Mona Lisa, that girl with the pearl earring, isn't it wonderful? We have the benefit of hindsight, don't we, really? We're able to, safely say it's a great painting and no one's going to say, oh, how dare you, it's rubbish, you don't know anything. But we don't have that with contemporary art. And I think that we'll look back in 100 years or so time and think, why on earth did everyone celebrate when the Montmartre warehouse burnt down and Tracy Emin's tent was destroyed? It was on the front pages of the newspaper, good riddance to that, etc. And we'll realise that we've lost really great work.
Yeah. I do think that some of the great works of modern art, I mean, I'm a huge Rothko fan, for example, who is now an established artist, but is still hated by a lot of people, you know.
Is he really?
Yes, a lot.
Yeah.
On my YouTube channel, I made a film about him, which has the most disparaging comments about any other artist apart from...
Do you care to share some of those, James?
Well, I actually delete the really bad ones. That's the power of YouTube. But it's it's my 5-year-old could do that. This is money laundering. Money laundering is the big one. Nobody understands money laundering. I think you explained it better than most people. But it's for me personally, if I go into a gallery and I see something I don't understand, that immediately becomes my favourite work. I absolutely love work that I don't understand.
That's quite counterintuitive.
In what sense?
Because, well, it's the opposite then, isn't it? I mean, you don't understand it, and what most people do when they don't understand art say, God, that's absolute rubbish, I don't understand it.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're doing the opposite.
I think I'm the opposite. I think it's... I really honestly feel that your job, my job, we're constantly telling people history about Mona Lisa, history about the Arnolfini portrait, etc., etc., etc. And we do know so much. And I grew up in a pre-internet age. Old granddad, but it's kind of you look at a painting now, you can do a reverse Google search, you can find out everything you want about everything you need to know about it, and that's why I think we know too much. I think we understand too much. And
well, that's dangerous talk, James.
Yeah, no, I think it's good to not always know or understand a work of art. I think scratching my head is good for me.
Yeah.
It's healthy. It's good that we know a lot about one particular painting, but I also like paintings or works of art where I don't know anything about it. You know, it flummoxes me. I find that fascinating to me.
Yeah, I would agree with you on this one as well, actually, James, because I've seen too much. I've seen quite a lot of art. What I'd like to see, though, is something I've not seen before.
Yeah.
I'd like to discover something, something new, or be shocked by something, and say, God, what on earth is going on here? So I would agree with you on that one, absolutely, yeah. Well, on that note, let's call it a wrap there, shall we, James?
Let's call it a wrap.
Yeah. Thanks very much, James.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Subscribe for more episodes of Artfully Said, brought to you by the Arts Society.